will. And we may take a question or two because we don't want to kick anyone. These people have been waiting in the line for a long time. We don't want to kick anyone out of line. And then the lovely blonde lady in the back of the room, Susan Blair, will give me the high sign when Joe is ready to come up and join the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen him on probably most of the episodes through the years, Detective Brian Ritz.
This is working, okay. I'm not good with these, so if I'm going to try to talk like I normally do without the mic. If you can't hear me, please let me know. I haven't said anything yet. Okay. I worked for the Colorado Springs Police Department for 35 years. Retired just over 35 years. During that time, I had a really wide variety of career options, career choices, job descriptions. I rode a bike for 6 years, a bicycle, and do a lot of community policing, problem-oriented policing. I'm a field training officer, property crimes detective, financial crimes detective, and I spent 4 years working homicide under Joe Kenda. It was a really good time. I had 3 great jobs in my department. In that department, at least 3 that I would say would be my best. One was homicide. One was when I was riding a bicycle. And the other was when my last job, when I was working with Sal, and we were doing emergency operations, critical events, critical incidents, and incident management. Yes. Okay. Is this better? Okay. Last cruise, it was the first time for me, and Drew Sweeney, who plays me on the show, was present. And everybody's asking, well, what do you think of Drew? And Drew is sitting there more worried about how I portray, or how he portrayed me and how I thought about it. I think he does a great job. A very pleasant individual. But I would say, 1, he carried the wrong gun. And 2, they always wore suits. This is what I would wear. Sport coat, tie, shirt. Because this stuff washes easier than a suit. And on some of those crime scenes, they were pretty ugly. Whether it was an old body been there for a week or just a really bloody mess. So, this was easier for me. If it was real cold, I'd take the jacket off, put my snow jacket on. Just made it easy for us. Nowadays, they wear 5'11" tactical pants and a polo shirt with a logo on it. They've gotten a little more casual anymore. The time that I spent working homicide, we had a lot of great cases. We've done quite a few of them on the show. My favorite was the Hood Reality Homicide. That was the first time I was really the lead detective on that show, or on that case. It involved a husband who decided he wanted to kill his wife because she had lupus, but his thinking was, because his religion said that you could kill her and be forgiven, but you couldn't divorce her. So it was weird, and that was really his whole motivation, was to get rid of this one. And he had an affair with a woman who was married to an army soldier, and got her to do the shooting because he didn't have the courage to do it himself. She went down for first-degree murder, was convicted, got life without the possibility of parole, until a governor commuted her sentence and gave her a chance for parole. She got parole, she got cancer, and she subsequently died as a suspect. He is still in jail because he managed to try to escape, got caught with drugs, so he's doing more time. He didn't get convicted of murder, he got convicted of conspiracy. But generally under Colorado law, if you were guilty of the conspiracy, you're also guilty of the murder. But jurors don't see it that way. He wasn't there, so how could he be guilty of murder? Well, because he planned it. And they tried it. He solicited more than one person, and he had made multiple attempts to get Jennifer to do the killing. So that was one of my favorite shows, and I was pleased when they decided they would show it, because it had been previously done by another investigation discovery type show that put it all on his. It was all his fault. This girl that did the shooting, she was blackmailed into it, she was coerced and all this stuff, and yet she knew what she was doing. She went there for the purpose of killing this woman, shot her once, knocked her to the ground, and stood over, took a single action army revolver, cocked it, stood over and had to shoot her. So, and then she say, oh, it's all his fault. Yeah. We get a lot of those. We get jury nullification cases where we shoot the guy on scene who's been shooting up everybody else. The only reason he's alive, he wore a military flak vest and a pellet caught the collar instead of going through his throat. Jury nullified that one, saying, I really don't know why they nullified that one. He killed a couple bikers, and maybe they didn't value bikers very much. I don't know. But as for guns, I always carried a 10 millimeter, rather large caliber semi-automatic pistol. I've seen them carry are like 6 hours or Berettas, which is a good gun. So I always had to give him a hard time. He's also a little bit shorter than I am, and I keep my hair a little bit longer than he does. Now, the other thing is, I kept trying to tell him change to a sport coat and tie, and he says the producers won't let him do that. They want him in suits. Yeah. I tell you, it was a great career working for the police department. Say 35 years is a long time to stay with one organization. A lot of times you don't hear people doing that. They'll find one, move to another one because of whatever reason, whether they're unhappy or just can't sit still very long. I happen to like it. You heard from Sal that I was a practical joker. I will tell you now, the only reason I was involved in the practical jokes was I was the butt of the practical jokes. I wasn't doing the practical jokes. I was being harassed, picked on, all the above and more. I was the butt of the practical jokes. I was not the practical joker. And he's not going to agree. You know what? That's my turn. I can say what I want now. So, the reality is, working with Joe Kenda, I learned a lot. He knew what he was doing. He was very good at it. He came back as a supervisor of the unit, and he came back as a lieutenant of the unit. He was the right man for the job. I'll tell you, Joe can tell a good story. I'm sure you've all heard a few of them, but he can tell a good story. But the cases that you see are actual police cases. These things happen in Colorado Springs, Del Paso County. There were people who died as a result of somebody else's poor judgment, lack of coping skills or whatever. And that's what we see a lot. When I retired from the police department, I did 2 years working for a school district as armed security. When my wife retired then I got out of it. So I am fully retired now. We both still live in Colorado Springs. I have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They both are married. I have 2 grandchildren right now. Both were born about 2.5 months premature. They were twins. One is doing great, the other one's still hospitalized. And my daughter's expecting. So we're trying to get all this stuff done at one time. So retire and become grandparents all at one time. I don't know, you guys have something you'd like to ask of me? I don't know what else to say. No? Oh, really? Sure.
I didn't get your microphone. Hang on.
My question is, what is it about Colorado Springs? That's like the Canada, they always like the same
I've heard that question before. I've heard those statements before, and people try to say, oh, it's the Colorado, the new Rocky Mountain High, because they were first to legalize recreational marijuana. A lot of the cases you see are actual cases. A lot of them involve drugs. Colorado Springs is not a small town, although they would like to think they are. They're a big city. 200 square miles of area and 650 cops total. That's not a whole lot. 450, 475,000 people that live in the Springs. You still have the rural El Paso County right around us. So it's a large area and a large city. Its homicide rate is low for its size. The clearance rate for those homicides is very high for its size. Colorado Springs has done a great job in policing, and great job in working with the community, and good at clearing cases. We work well with the district attorney's office, worked well with DEA, ATF, all these agencies all worked in a very positive manner. There are 5 major military bases around Colorado Springs. The United States Air Force Academy. The United States Air Force Academy. Fort Carson, Cheyenne Mountain Center, the complex. Schriever Air Force Base, and Peterson Air Force Base. So we did a lot with military. Most of the problems really came from Fort Carson as opposed to any of the Air Force. The academy people, if they got in trouble, they were out, so they really behaved themselves pretty good. But that has a big impact on Colorado Springs. When there's a great deployment, a lot of officers, a lot of soldiers are gone, our economy's down, and we don't have a great amount of money to put into more officers. We were well below the 2 per 1,000 individual that is the ultimate goal in law enforcement. We were like 1.4 at one point. 1.4 officers per 1,000 people. And that's not a whole lot. And that's not all officers that are on patrol. You have detectives, you have just a wide variety of specialized groups, tactical enforcement, motorcycle enforcement, that are out there with their own designated or specific chores to be doing. Their missions were sometimes different than what patrol was. Patrol has probably the best job because they go do their job, they go home at night, and they come back and start doing the thing tomorrow morning. They go in kind of raw sometimes, so it's probably the more dangerous job because by the time we were called out, they had to control the scene. Our biggest risk was trying to track down the suspect and capture him. We also had fugitive unit, which helped on that. We'd have tactical operations would come out, SWAT would go in and break down the door for us and grab the guy. So really, although we carried raid vests with us, generally we didn't wear our vests unless we were really out after somebody who could be a potential threat for us. What am I going to say? Oh, there was a question.
Brian, you mentioned Colorado was the first state to make recreational marijuana legal. I'm from Arizona. I will tell you that in Arizona, that came up on our ballot and we voted down. I am very interested with any track record that is now available after the number of years that it has been legalized in the state. What, if any, evidence do you see, or does law enforcement see, of the effect of that law change on crime, on the overdosing, or children getting involved with it, that it's in the home, vehicular, anything in regards to that? What kind of statistics are they beginning to formulate from that original law change?
It's hard for me to answer that. I will tell you that most of our homicides usually involve drugs or family relations. Just watching the newspaper, reading the articles, medical marijuana had a positive financial impact to those areas that allowed it. Same with the recreational marijuana had a positive financial impact for the communities. There was a lot of talk about worrying about DUI and DUID, driving under the influence of drug problems. And that hasn't really materialized. I mean, there are a lot of people that say, we're going to have all this. The reason it may not have materialized is because there's no real field test for somebody who's high. When you sit there, drug test or a alcohol test where you do the physical maneuvers will tell you a lot. They don't always apply to somebody who's under the influence of medical marijuana. They had problems trying to determine at what point, like 0.05 is impaired on alcohol. They don't try to figure out what point of nanograms of marijuana or THC in somebody's bloodstream actually impaired them. They weren't ready for doing what they did because law enforcement didn't have the tools necessary to support the charge. The other thing is it made Colorado Springs, El Paso County, not Colorado Springs, sorry, El Paso County and the rural areas of Colorado more susceptible to organized crime because we get a lot of people growing marijuana when you were allowed to have 4 or 5 plants. Originally it was 99 or something. And people were just growing it there willy-nilly and then shipping it out of the state. And we get a lot of problems with that. The El Paso County will go out there in their areas and do drug busts where they have containers full of drugs when they're done. Remember, people growing marijuana for the purpose of selling outside the state. So it made it easier for them to grow it, a little harder for them to get it out, but it did have some impact on the city itself. I hope I answered some of what you had to say.
Got a question over here.
I was wondering if in your homicide career, if you had to deal with street killers or serial killers, those being a relatively small percentage of the murderers out there, and if you did, was it more challenging?
I personally did not do anything that I can recall working on somebody who was a serial killer. We had some in Colorado. I'm trying to think, I can't remember the last one. But it would be more challenging. We speak for the victim. Our job is to work for the victim, okay? And the more victims you have from one person makes it a little harder. Try to figure out their motive, try to track down their patterns or what they do, to try to build a case against an individual. And you may be able to build a case against this one victim, but not against the others. So sometimes you get lucky. You get a guy who's killed more than 2 or 3 people. You get him on one case. You still got him off the street. That's to our advantage.
Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're going to have almost like a 3-way conversation with whoever wants to have a question, and especially the dynamic, like I talked about this morning, of how they worked as a team. What I would like to do, once again, is at the bar, if we could kind of keep it down, and also, if you would like a blender drink, the blenders are really loud and we can't hear. So if you're gonna order a blender drink, I call them a foo-foo drink, like a pina colada or a strawberry daiquiri, any kind of blender drink, do us a big favor. There are lots of bars on this same deck, just that way. If you could get the blender drinks from there, just bring it back in. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Brian Ritz and Joe Kenda.
We had to sign everything. I had to sign everything. Everything in the world. Brian worked for me for a long time because he's an excellent detective. He paid attention to detail. I always knew every time Brian told me anything, I didn't have to worry about it because it was right. That's important. Other detectives who worked for me would tell me something, and I'd think, did he really say that? Is that what he? Because sometimes I find out it wasn't. That was never a concern with Brian, ever. You knew that's what it was. Whatever he said is what it was. And that made a huge difference when you're doing a planning of an investigation. And I was sorry to see him leave homicide, but he wanted to advance in rank. Good for him. And he did. Not surprising, but he did. So we had a great time together. We spent a lot of times in the middle of the night. We saw a lot of sunrises together. We weren't supposed to be doing that, but we did. And that's the nature of it. So anyway, Brian's a good guy. There aren't too many good guys. You're welcome. So now, who has a question?
I'm going to jump out and say one thing. There were times when we were very busy. 3 homicides in a weekend. One Friday night, one Saturday night, one Sunday night. And when you finally get back to the office and try to start doing your dictation, writing your reports, sorting your evidence, you're going, which case goes with what? That note's over here, this note's over here. So there was always that kind of game playing. We've had 2 in one day, 2 in one afternoon. Keeps you very busy because one call team's on, that's it. If it's really bad, we might try to pull the other people in, but generally one call team is on. And when I was working, there was 3 detectives on a call team. Now it's like 8 or 9 detectives, and part of that's due to social media because somebody's sitting down and running everybody on social media to see what they have to say. So if you're going to do a crime, don't put it on social media. That's the other thing. There's 2 rules. You keep your mouth shut, and the second you don't put it on social media, and you're a whole lot better off.
It's common for people who shoot people for the cartels that they'll pose with their victims. The idiot standing there with his foot in the chest of the victim holding the gun, it's on his phone, You go through the phone and say, oh, Ernesto, your lawyer is going to hate this photograph. He's really not going to like this. That's better. Yes?
I'm Robin from Portland, Oregon area. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on the paid anarchists that they're talking about.
I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay.
I do know what you're talking about. The people that are paid to go out and disrupt legal, correct protesters. You know, everybody can protest, but there's a way to protest, and then these anarchists come in and try to turn it into a violent, property damage, beating people up, all this type of protest. When I was, the last position I had was in patrol support, where I managed and further developed the crowd control team. So we were quite aware of this. We sent 20 officers and myself down to Anniston, Alabama, Center for Domestic Preparedness, where they taught us crowd control techniques and crowd control devices, how to defeat these devices that these geniuses all use to try to further disrupt the community. There's a lot of work, and it was at the point. There's quite an art to trying to do this, because you're trying to protect their civil rights, your civil rights, and the rest of the people's civil rights. And emotions run high usually during these type of protests. And as an officer, if some guy is all tied up in some kind of protester device that's blocking it, you got to get him out of that without hurting him, or you become civilly liable for a lot of things.
Is there anything we can do? We're getting lots of bad press around.
You know, the best thing to do if somebody has a protest is ignore it. Don't be part of it. Don't go anywhere near it. You know, it's like we used to tell our kids in school. If two guys are going to fight, everybody else doesn't show up, they won't fight. Because they don't have an audience. They're not being pushed into it.
Who else has a question?
One thing to add, remember something if you don't remember anything else. There's no such thing as a spontaneous demonstration. No such thing. They're all organized for one reason or another.
Hi, I'm Nancy from Los Angeles. I know you don't particularly like the police TV shows, but there are a lot of TV shows about private investigators, and I'm wondering if you ever ran across any in your career and what that was like.
Is this for me or for Brian? Okay. I had contact with several private investigators who work usually for defense attorneys. Generally, they're employed by defense attorneys. That's the only way to make a living as a private investigator generally, is to work for lawyers, because individuals can't afford them or don't want to afford them, so they wind up working for attorneys. I knew some very good people. I knew some ones that weren't so good. It's like any other occupational group, you know. You have your good ones and your average ones and your not so hot ones. Well, that's just the way it is. And I think, what do you think about private investigators? Be nice, Brian. Just remember.
I'm trying to do this right. I had a case where it was a multi-million-dollar theft. And I was pulled a warrant on a business. Their attorney got involved, locked it down. So here I had seizing the business for a while. And the bad guy who I was investigating grabbed all the evidence, took it up to a friend of his and the family up in Denver, and asked him to hide it for him. Well, the husband wasn't there, but the wife was there. She said, "Oh, really? Well, my husband's working that case. He was a private investigator." All of a sudden, I had every bit of evidence I need. The building's mine, and it worked. That's one case with a private investigator that worked out for me. That's because the genius didn't know he was taking the evidence to the guy that was working the case against him. And then he did pretty good, because these were 5 or 8 guys that left a large corporation and started their own company. And he got some cute little blonde to go in there and ask for a job, and of course they hired her, and it was his mole that he put inside the business, and it pretty well cleared it. They can be sneakier than we can. Their rules are a little bit different than ours by a lot. We're trying to support the Constitution. They're just trying to get the guy caught. We have a lot harder job, but they can be helpful. They can also really jam you up, because everything they find, you have to follow up on, whether it's good or bad, and thus just prolong your investigation.
Over here on your right side, please.
Hi, I have a question, and I guess it's more of the personal side. During your investigation days, how did you balance work-life balance? Like, what was that like? That's something that, as much as you guys worked and were on the scene and on, at the office and everything, your wives and children, how did that, how hard was that, I guess?
Well, if I ever figured that out, I'd answer your question. There's no way to do that. There's just no way to do it. It's, my wife and my kids suffered for it. I tried to keep it from them. I don't know if anybody said this already because I was busy signing, but the next to the last episode of this season. Now, I don't have any input into naming episodes. The programming department at Discovery Incorporated names them 72 hours before they go in the air. So we never know what the name's going to be. I know them by numbers, all right? So the next to the last episode, 8/19, this season, season 8, episode 19, is the Kathy Kenda Show. 1 hour, the whole show will be Kathy, and shockingly, my kids, who agreed to be interviewed by Discovery. And I thought, wow, my son's a commander in the Navy and intelligence officer, and it's like the last thing I ever thought he'd ever do is talk to anybody about anything. My daughter is a GS-14 in top secret position at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. And I'm thinking, I say, well, yeah, I'll do it. You will? So anyway, Kathy and I the other day got the raw footage of the interviews. We laughed until we thought we were going to throw up. It's the kids' perspective of what they remember their childhood was like, and their parents who lived that same experience has a totally different perspective. It's really great. And they hustled my kid, my son, and oh yeah, and he fell for it. I was disappointed in him, but they said, he said, "Is that camera on?" Oh, it's not on. It's always on. You know what I mean? And the guy says, "How was your mother as a cook?" And he says, "Oh, my mother was a horrible cook." And Kathy fell off the sofa. So, but it's really interesting to see. And in those interviews, they both said that they never felt that I imposed my work on them. And it was my greatest fear. And I thought, I know I've done this, oh God, a horrible thing. They don't think so. I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's really fun. But that episode should be something very different. That's some true insight into the four of us, my wife and my 2 kids and I. So that'll be fun, I think, for one. But anyway, that's the answer. You try the best you do the best you can, which is never good enough. Right?
That really holds true. My wife raised our kids. I was there as much as I could be. I was on call probably half of my career. So we decided, we want to go to a movie. We're taking 2 cars in case I get called out. We want to go to dinner. Take 2 cars. She had to put up a lot. She knew what I was doing. She was a police dispatcher when I met her. She was good at telling me where to go then, and she's still good at telling me where to go. But if it wasn't for the family support, our job would have been a whole lot harder. And they did make it. The family is, obviously, you're doing this job for family. There are cops that are cops because that's what they want to be. Others use it as a career to help their families, to support their families. That's where I was at. She supported me in my choices in my career. She still tells me where to go, but that's okay. I'm used to that.
Hi, Joe. Phil from Atlanta. Once again, I want to thank you for your service, and most of all, earlier today, when you mentioned essentially recruiting, hiring, mentoring, essentially choosing people for detective work. My question is, as a boss, was there ever a time when somebody didn't exactly take to it, they stumbled out of the blocks, and then you're initially thinking, it might be time for them to find another job, but then they totally surprised you, and it's like, wow, I'm so glad I hired this person.
Oh, of course. I mean, it always happens. When somebody's new at something, they don't start off winning the first race. They finish in the middle of the pack, or maybe even last. And you give them time, and you see how it progresses, and you watch them, and you pay attention to their work, and what you're looking for is signs of improvement. If there is improvement, it will continue. If improvement never initiates, then maybe this was a mistake, okay? But I've never seen that happen. They were always able to to catch on, as it were, and move forward with things and become really good at it. Like anything else, you don't paint a picture the first time you try. It's the same thing in murder. It's the very same thing.
When we had people like, as a sergeant and as a lieutenant, I had to pick and select people for the jobs. You run into a few that just, it wasn't for them. They saw it as one thing, they realized it's not for them. And a lot of these guys that would try a new position, new career, and it wasn't working for them, they were intelligent enough to recognize that. Problem is, if you don't make it in a specialized unit, where you go? You go back to patrol. But patrol is really the backbone of the police department. They're first on scene. They're the ones who make the initial calls, make the initial determination what's going on, and who else may need to be brought into the case. When we go out, the scene was locked down. It was secured. Tactical operations is the same way. Officers get on scene, you get a barricaded suspect, who they call SWAT. Who's the safest people out there right now? SWAT. They work together as a team, they train together as a team, and they have all the good tools. So patrol is the area where we like people, where we want them to succeed. Yes, it's nice that they can come back or expand and go into work with us in investigations or whatever like that. And it's a bad thing. They get a bad rap when they can't make it as investigator. We'll ship them back to patrol. It's not shipping them back to patrol. It's giving them the opportunity to go back and continue to do what they were good at. Because we don't generally pick people who weren't good at what position they were at in the first place.
The other thing I think is important for all of you to know, that both Brian and I, and every other police supervisor or manager in the police department, when you have an employee who misbehaves, particularly when he does so intentionally, we take action. We have to recruit our members to the ranks of human rights, and as a result, we make mistakes. If we could get just those robots to work, it would solve all these problems. But we can't. So far, the technology is not there. So we have to invite humans to join the police department, and they bring with them their prejudices and their mistakes and so on. As an example, because it's kind of amusing, at least I think it is, I had an officer who I will not name, who I thought was brutal. I couldn't prove it, not at the time, but I just thought he was. And I didn't like him at all. And I called him into my office. I was a watch commander in the Sand Creek Division, and I got promoted to lieutenant. And I said, "Come in here, I want to talk to you." And he's arrogant, kind of standoffish. And "What?" "Sit down." And I said, "My wife says I need a hobby." And he's looking at me like, "What are you talking about?" Yeah. "She says all I think about is the police department, and all I do is work, and I never come home, I never take the kids anywhere." And I drone on for a little while, and he's looking at me like a dog looking at a TV set. He doesn't know what's going on here, And finally I said, and I decided something, that I think my wife is right. I need a hobby. And I've selected you as my hobby. And I'm going to spend the next 90 days running you out of this police department on a rail and get out of my office. And 64 days later, I fired him. And we went to court, and we played the game, and Civil Service Commission, and you can't do this to me. Oh, yes, I can, and I can prove it. And it's stuck. So we get rid of these people when we should. All right?
We have a question over here to your left.
Hi, gentlemen. Rhonda Taylor over here from Kansas City, Missouri. This is looking for advice, and it's actually for my husband. As far as since you two gentlemen have been through the promotional process, if you have any pearls of wisdom, suggestions or things, he spent 5 years in patrol, 1 year in crimes against children, and now he's currently in homicide just a little over a year. And I am encouraging him to go forward with the sergeant's process. And I was just wondering if you kind of suggestion of maybe he needs to be in investigations a few more years. Obviously, we want him to be a well-rounded supervisor. Just any sort of advice you might have. Thank you.
Obviously, the more experience they have in a wider variety of career options in the police department is to their advantage. I would always tell the guys that were interested in supervisors, mine was more towards their interview techniques and stuff like that. And generally, you're trying to get them to say not who they are or what they are, is what they can do for the department, what they have to offer the department. And that is hard. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people, like I don't generally like talking about myself. My job made me do it. I'm very much an introvert with type A personality probably. But I'm an introvert, but my job made me go outside.
I see why we teased him all the time. You see what I mean? He was too easy. I mean, we just had to.
So what Sal told you was wrong. What I told you was right. But really, that's just it. The more experience he has and more he has to offer the department, not what the department has to offer him or what he's done. And that's really the best way to encourage people is teaching them to be able to speak about themselves in a non-bolsterous way and what they can do for the department in a new position.
We have another question right back here.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Casey from Indianapolis, Indiana. And
One Indy fan. That's
I was wondering how long it took for you, each of you, to solve, the longest time it took for you to solve a crime, and also any interactions with sovereign citizens that you might have had.
What was the second part again?
Interaction with sovereign citizens.
Oh, yeah. The street corner lawyer, you mean those guys? I'll answer that. And the longest case I ever worked was a homicide, 9 years to turn a case. It resulted in arrest for 2 people, and both went to prison for life for first-degree murder. So 9 years to get there, okay? You have people in the world who believe, because they listen to some idiot on a radio station or something that says that they have certain rights, inalienable rights, and they can do this and they can do that, and it's all nonsense. And those people wind up in jail if they commit a crime, and so on. I had an example where the IRS, well, you wouldn't know it was the IRS, I didn't know at the time, but I was a supervisor of patrol. 2 guys go on a disturbance call. 12 guys in sport coats are dragging the contents of a very nice house out and stacking it in the street. Sport coats and ties. And the guy that owns the house is purple with rage. And the 2 cops are kind of standing there looking at me. And I get out of the car, and they've directed him to me because I'm the supervisor. And he says, I want all these people arrested. Okay. Is this your house? Yes. Okay. And so what does that mean? Well, I don't pay taxes because I'm a sovereign citizen. Is that right? So you believe that the government doesn't have the authority to make you pay taxes? Yes. And have you ever paid taxes? No. So this is the $600,000 house. And the contents seem to be rather nice. Well, I'm a sovereign. Okay, you said that. You said that. Who's in charge here, gentlemen? And the guy says, that would be me. I'm Special Agent so-and-so, Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. I have an order from a tax court to tell that fat-mouthed idiot that's not his house, it's mine. And I don't want his property, and that's why I'm stacking it in the street. And I think it's gonna rain, so you gotta go rent a truck to get his stuff out of the street. And I walked up to this guy who's standing there purple with rage, and I said, Mr. Citizen, I think he's right. I think it's gonna rain. I think you need to go run a truck, you nitwit. You know? And so we promptly got in our police cars and left. And the IRS kept carrying all his stuff out of his house, and stacking it in the street. And as I was leaving, I reminded him that littering is against the law. So, he has a certain amount of time to remove this property from the street.
Most of the contacts I ever had were when one of my units, whether it be a motorcycle officer or whatever, would run into somebody and they were trying to write them a ticket or something like that. And of course, I'm a sovereign citizen, you can't stop me, you can't do this, you have no rights. And trying to talk logic to them is not going to work. There are times you have to get physical with somebody and you get your job done without the minimum amount of force. If that means dragging them out through the window, it means dragging them out through the window. It has happened. Probably should happen more often, but I'm not supporting that. So generally, they've become very aggressive, assertive, and all I can tell my officers is just do your job the way you normally do your job. It'll all come out in the end. We do get officers every once in a while to take things personal, and that's when internal affairs complaints come down. You got to investigate them, discipline them, or most likely have to discipline them for something stupid. And it usually dealt with something just like that. They got all hot and bothered because somebody said, I'm a sovereign citizen, you have no control over me. Well, like heck I don't, and the fight's on. But really, they're out there. I think my brother's one of them. Okay, actually I know he is, but he doesn't live in Colorado anymore. He's in Louisiana or Texas somewhere. So.
I used to say to people all the time, they get in my face about this. You can't do this, you can't do that. But I'd look at them and I'd say, I don't think you like me. I don't think I could stand it if I thought you didn't like me. And then they just get out and think I'm like a Roman candle. It is great. I picture everybody as covered in buttons. It's covered in buttons, and I push all their buttons all the time. And it's great fun. It's like a form of entertainment. Let's see what this thing does. Ooh, that's a good one.
Hello, I am Deb from Phoenix, and I'm sorry if this question has been asked and answered. I may or may not have been sleeping at 9:30 this morning when the first questions were asked. How in the hell did Investigation Discovery find you? Of all the jurisdictions in this country, how did they find you and pick you? I mean, not that it wasn't
I didn't answer it this morning. I'll answer it again, okay, for those of you that weren't here. At the time, I'd spent a lot of time in front of the press. We have a press information officer in the department, but the media people know that the press information officer is going to speak the company line. He's not going to say anything of any significance. He's not known anything of any significance because he's not really part of the case. He's a talking head for the police department, and he gets up and says, well, we're going to endeavor to persevere, or whatever that means, and that's why it's going to go. So they want to talk to me because I'm running the homicide unit, so they want to talk to me. So a lot of exposure to the press. One particular case, Diane Sawyer had a program called Turning Point, which was an attempt by ABC News to get in the 60 Minutes crowd. It was on Wednesday nights, primetime TV, 2 or 3 stories, just like 60 Minutes. They did that show for several years. She interviewed me on a murder case. That interview eventually was sold to A&E, the History Channel, whatever, because I did it generically. I offered no names, dates, places, times. So I did 30 minutes of national television based on a generic comment about violence in society. So it was a good selling point for people to sell that piece, to other networks. And somebody from Discovery sees it and they write me a letter. And they say, we're gonna make you a TV star. And I was retired and my wife was sitting across from me at the table and she said, what's that? I said, it's a letter from some guy. It says you're gonna put me on TV, like that's gonna happen. You can call him? Nope. I don't like TV people. I don't call him. Well, she beat me up for 3 days, and I finally said, all right, I'll call him. And it premiered, season 8 premiered August 29th, so she was right.
So, we only have time for about maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and this is our last opportunity to ask questions pertaining to Detective Brian Ritz and how they interacted. So let's make the last few questions about how they worked as a team.
Hi, I'm Diane from Texas. Howdy. I've noticed that criminals really like to talk about what they've done, and I'm wondering how often jailhouse snitches work into your solving cases.
Jailhouse snitches have helped clear cases, but once again, where you get your information? Somebody who's already screwed up is in jail. For what reason are they willing to come forward? Speaking from personal experience, my brother was murdered a couple of years ago. property was stolen, somebody said, hey, I know where property like that is, kind of led to another group. And that led to the guy who was ultimately responsible for the death of my brother. The interesting part was there was a jailhouse snitch because, as I said, criminals are not the brightest people out there. They don't know when to keep their mouth shut. And he, of course, said things that was very detrimental to his defense to somebody in the jailhouse. And those statements got in. And when they were in and were just getting ready to do closing arguments, he leans over to his attorney and says, I'm going to plead guilty to first-degree murder. I think he realized that his goose was cooked. He was going to get one way or the other. So he just leaned over and said, I'll plead guilty. I believe that he's probably going to plead guilty, but until he allocutes or says what he did in front of the judge, and the judge spends 30 or 45 minutes trying to talk him out of it, and finally accepts it, you're not ready to relax yet. Once he does that, the judge accepts it, now you have time to relax. And that's what happened. I think the jailhouse snitch in our case was falling the final nail in the coffin on this individual. What probably helps is some of them will come forward and say, you know what, I'm not after anything, I screwed up, I made my mistakes, I'll pay for it. But this guy did this and I don't like that, so I'm going to tell you. When they come forward and they're not looking for a sentence reduction or dropping their bail rate or whatever, it's nice to see, it's nice to hear. Once again though, anything you get, you have to investigate. And you get like Crime Stoppers tips or anything else. These things come in and you get inundated with somebody, well, I think I saw something like that over here or maybe it's over there. We have to investigate them because we're guaranteed the defense is going to investigate them. And if we don't do a full job, we're going to lose. So it does tie us up. Even the jailhouse ones tie us up and get us more down in the mud and the mire than where we need to be. But they have helped. Some of them are in it for their own personal gains. Others are actually civic-minded, which would surprise you sometimes.
We have a question straight ahead here in the back.
I'm Barbara from Kingsburg, California. Brian, what's your favorite story about Joe?
Favorite story about Joe? He's a good storyteller. I think that's pretty evident by what we do in these shows. Honestly, I can't really say what would be my favorite story about Joe. I enjoyed working with him. I enjoyed working homicide. I wanted to get in that unit, and I worked for it, and they asked me to be part of the unit. He was part of that request. So I'm just very pleased to have the opportunity to have worked with him. He did teach me a lot. If you don't learn something all the time, you're losing, and I never had the chance to lose working for him.
Hey, Joe, this is Barbara again. I want to know what your favorite story is, Brian.
Yeah, he just said he knows where I live. I tell you something. Brian is I've said it before, Brian's an excellent detective, and I didn't have to concern myself. But I turned Brian loose a number of times when we had, like he mentioned, multiple cases. That's the hardest thing in everybody because nobody sleeps for days, and everybody's they don't know their own name or anything else. But I still knew I could rely on Brian to get something done. If you hadn't slept for 2 days, you could rely on him to get something done. And I couldn't say that about a lot of other people that had to work for me. So I used him, I actually abused him more than once because I knew that he could do it. And I wasn't convinced that others could. So he probably owes me a few blows over the head for that. But that's what I would do. I mean, Brian was my guy when it came to doing something that had to be done right, that had to be done right now. He's the guy.
You heard Sal describe me as a BB in a box car or a BB in a box. Yes, I worked at a different pace than a lot of people. I didn't expect them to work at my pace, but I worked at a different pace because I was happy at that pace. And it has hounded me my entire career, even as a supervisor. You know, this is the way I work. I don't expect you to do that. I expect me to do that. And it was always getting me harassed and other things. And cops can be cruel. The problem is they can be crueler to other cops than they are to the public. But every time it just builds better character and better relationships. And the reality is, the Colorado Springs Police Department is one strong organization because of the people it has in it, and the work that Joe did, and some of the work that I did, the history of the department, and it really speaks for itself in ways capable to maintain a high clearance rate on homicides, because that is the ultimate crime.
We have time for We have time for one more question, and then the bingo people are coming in here. Another round of bingo. Yes.
Hi, Brian. Bob from Vancouver, Washington. I have one question for you. What is your most satisfying case? What is the one who went home at night happy that you solved?
I think my best case was that first one I mentioned already, the Hood Reality homicide. There was a lot of work done by a lot of good people on that case. 2 people were tried in 2 different jurisdictions because they had a change of venue. One was Fort Morgan, which, Fort Morgan. I won't say much more. It's Fort Morgan. There's not a whole lot there. And the other was Glenwood Springs. What's real nice is I got to spend like 2 weeks in the pool at Glenwood Springs because they say, hey, we need you on Tuesday. You rush up there to get out on Tuesday, and they don't even use you before the end of the week. You got to go back the next week. And you're sitting around in the pool being paid for it. That's a pretty good time. But just being able to clear that case and all the different factions that got involved in that case, it was interesting. It was fun. It was also one of my first autopsies. Okay, and this is going to sound cruel, but parts are parts. First time I did an autopsy, I stood over the doctor's shoulder, and he showed me everything. After that, you go and look at wound dynamics because that's all you really needed. And the only reason a cop said an autopsy is so that the coroner doesn't have to go to a prelim. We can testify to what the coroner said at a prelim. But it was interesting work. The hardest ones probably when it involved children, parents who couldn't control themselves, or boyfriends who couldn't control themselves and actually hurt the kids instead of the person they're trying to hurt. If we had those too.
Okay, on that positive note. All right, so did you have a good time today? You will find that the 10 different cast members of the show from Colorado Springs and Knoxville are very approachable. Like the comedians say, we're here all week, folks. Just you can go up to them and talk to them. And if there was a question that was answered, but then you want more information, they'll be happy to chat with you. Also, tomorrow's going to be a good time. They're all planning to go to what's the first one? Capo Wabo or the Mango Deck. The Capo Wabo. Not everyone's going to that. That's just for the hard partiers. But the first one we're going to Mango Deck. All the cast members are planning to be there. They're just want to talk to you. They meet you. Television can be a lonely business. You're sitting in a studio somewhere and just talking to a camera, and they love this interaction. They told me they really, really like these forums. So the next thing that's going to happen is 7:15, Captain's Welcome Aboard reception at 7:15 in Deck 5 midship, and then after that, most of us have dinner at 8 o'clock. Ladies and gentlemen, Detective Brian Ritz and Lieutenant Joe Kenda.